Welcome to World Heritage Rookies, the podcast where we explore UNESCO World Heritage Sites one episode at a time. We are Lina
and Ralph, and we will travel alongside you to some of the most stunning sites our world has to offer.
Each week, we dive into the history, fun facts, and reasons why World Heritage Sites matter for humanity, sharing our own discoveries and travel tips along the way.
So, let's dive in and learn about some World Heritage together.
Welcome everybody to our third episode of World Heritage Rookies. If you are new here, nice to meet you. My name is Lina.
And I'm Ralph. And if you're not new here, thank you very much for keeping faithful to us and continuing listening to us rambling about World Heritage Sites.
I hope it's interesting, and I hope if you're new, you are gonna get to know some interesting facts. And today's episode it's on Ralph's responsibility. So, Ralph, what are we gonna talk today?
No pressure. Yes, today we're gonna talk about probably my favorite World Heritage Site for very specific reasons that I'm going to go in quickly into, but I think also the one that you do not really want to learn much more about, right?
I do have to admit, I know too much, and that's an issue because I will pretend surprised though.
That's good. So you can feign along that you still learn something new from me. But no, we're going to talk today about Aachen Cathedral, which is not only the first European World Heritage Site we're going to talk about in this podcast, but it's actually also the first World Heritage Site that was designated in Germany in the year 1978. And
as fatherland.
Yeah, in a bit like this. So, and as a bit of a background why Lina is sort of tired of hearing about this podcast is not the first, let's say, attempt of me to scratch the creative itch that I have to talk about World Heritage Sites.
I think that this is your fourth project ongoing. Always started with Aachen Cathedral, and it's really interesting because you really are a creative person. I think so.
Thank you.
But you are terrible at finalizing things.
Yeah, I like to come up with new ideas here. And like Lina said, every time I had a certain idea about World Heritage stuff, I was obviously always starting with, Germany, because that's what I feel most comfortable with. And Aachen Cathedral comes first in the list, alphabetical. So that was the reason behind this. But it's actually also the first World Heritage Site in this podcast that we have visited ourselves. So we will be able to share some of our own experiences, but that's going to come further along. So I think before I jump into telling a bit about the history and what I think is worth to know about Aachen Cathedral, we're starting as usually, Lina, what do you know about Aachen Cathedral? You should know a lot from what we've just discussed, so no pressure on you right now, but what do you remember mostly, or what pops into your mind when we're talking about Aachen Cathedral?
Always Charlemagne. And I think that this is going to be the main character of this podcast. Interesting guy, to be honest.
True.
And this is the center of power he created, and the legend in some sense. And so, I mean, I can keep talking, but that will be just maybe taking some points out of what you have prepared. So let's dive in.
Yes, I mean, for sure, Charlemagne is going to be a big part in what I'm going to talk about, especially he's going to be the starting point as a bit of a background.
The superstar.
And spoiler, he will make his reappearances in this podcast because there are more World Heritage Sites linked to him, but more about to follow.
And I love that we visit one, he's like, guess who was here? Or guess who created this? Or, guess who put money on this?
Yes, definitely a recurring theme, is at least in the German-speaking world. So, but yeah, before I jump into telling you and our listeners more about the history and interesting facts about Aachen Cathedral, as usual, I will quickly start with giving an overview about the sources that we used. You will, as regularly, also find them in the podcast notes, so you can follow along. But yeah, like in the last times, I think our two main sources are always the official website from UNESCO, where you can find more details about the listings, and also the community for World Heritage Travelers, which is worldheritagesite.org. Apart from that, obviously, for the more detailed information, I took a look at websites like the Encyclopedia Britannica for Aachen Cathedral, the World History Encyclopedia with information about Charlemagne. I took a look at the official website, obviously, of Aachen Cathedral, which is aachenerDom.de, where you can get more information. And then also I took a look at some very specific websites for the German market about there, which is welterbedeutschland.de, which is, well, talking about German World Heritage, the website for the pilgrimage in Aachen, which we're also going to come about. And for some of the travel tips, I took a look at travel blog from, I think his name is Michael Turtle, and like he has some really, really cool World Heritage trip actually that he discovered and that he describes a time travel turtle. And last but not least, I also took some of the information from reading in one of my favorite magazines. So no advertisement about there, but like I
mean, it could be in the future. Just heads up.
But like, so yeah, I'm a big fan of a German history magazine called Geo-Epoche, which I also took as a source. But
really good magazine. Unfortunately, all in German. But if you are learning German, this is an amazing tool to practice your language.
And I also took a look at some of the maps. I mean, obviously, I will not be able to post them due to copyright reasons, but I will get sources which are actually the magazine issues where you can learn more about not just Aachen Cathedral, Charlemagne, but in general about the Franks. So I can also recommend you checking that out. Yes, and with that out of the way, let me get started with the history part, and as you said, with especially some information about Charlemagne, because you have to know a bit about him in order to understand the significance and the importance of Aachen Cathedral for like really overall Germany, and especially in these parts when it's relevant. Okay, so Charlemagne, his German name is Karl der Große. In English, you might know him about Charles the Great. What's it in Spanish?
Carlomagno.
Okay, yeah, so a really recurring theme there for sure about like emphasizing the great. So Charlemagne is generally considered the first emperor of the West of the Middle Ages after the downfall of the Roman Empire. And he became the sole ruler of the Frankish Empire after the death of his father and brother. So during already the time of his father, the Frankish Empire, which in the beginning stretched more to France, today's France as main of the area, but also towards the region Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany. Already during the time of his father, it was quite expanded, but it was then especially Charlemagne who took a huge part in making it become a real powerhouse in the Middle Ages. And when his father died for a short period, he actually was sort of a co-ruler with his brother. And in all of the sources that I read, like there's a little bit of uncertainty how his relationship was with his brother. So some said like, yeah, okay, they sort of got along. In the Geo-Epoche magazine I recently wrote, it seemed a bit more like there was more tension, and it was not that of a bad situation that happened when his brother died. There is no any indication that he died because of Charlemagne.
Mysterious reasons.
Yeah, I mean, like, I did not find out why he died. It is never in any way associated towards Charlemagne himself, but I can assume it was not something that he was sad about.
Always, also, he was the all-powerful emperor of the Franks, so I guess that he can rewrite one couple historical facts if he would like it. Of course, we're not saying he did.
Yes, true. I mean, as we always know, history is in the end written by the winners. But yeah, so the fact is, like, after the death of his father and also after the death of his brother, Charlemagne became the sole ruler of the Franks. He, over the next decades, he was really, really keen on expanding the borders of his empire, mostly through campaigns and military force. So he was by the end able to expand the territory of the Franks to, areas of today, France, Belgium, Netherlands, big parts of Germany, northern Italy, parts of Spain also. And he has been fighting a lot of enemies during this time. His most famous crusades campaigns were against the Saxons. And the way he has always justified is so Charlemagne was a devout Christian, and he saw it as sort of his duty to bring Christianity to the pagan people in Europe, and especially the Saxons in Germany's area. They were mostly still pagan worshipping, and this was probably his longest and most fearful campaigns that he had. But in the end, he was able to really expand to a big sort of unified empire. And yeah, that's...
I do have a question. Do we have any historical information of his personality? Was he known as this expansionist, a strong ruler, or he was more known as an strategist? What history says about it?
So he is actually known under multiple things. So he was for sure considered a very strong military figure, and somebody who, well, in a way, sort of way, had to be ruthless. I guess that's for any kind of rulers that want to expand their empires or their kingdoms through force. You have to be certainly ruthless. So especially in the beginning, he was a man of power, and he knew how he would get what he wanted. But what I also will come later, he became also known afterwards, especially somebody who was very focused on making sure his rule would become prosperous, and that he would foster literature, art, and anything else. And this is also a foundation what, for example, led to the foundation of Aachen Cathedral. So in general, he was considered as a very good fighter, but also as a very good ruler, and especially, well, when it's written with Christianity in background, and a lot of the medieval records are coming from Christian or church sources. He was sort of always portrayed as a defender of faith and a true hero and champion of Christianity. And yes, this is actually a bit sort of a good handover, because after his very successful expansion to the various regions that I mentioned before, his court in Aachen, which became one of the centerpieces of his whole empire, it really sort of also became an intellectual center of this empire, because he was really keen on supporting literature, language, education, and architecture. And that's especially why the period when he has been fostering and really attracting a lot of intellectuals from his time towards Aachen Cathedral is considered the Carolingian Renaissance, because it was a shining time in order to foster and further knowledge further ahead. And sort of his main achievements, or the highlight of his whole career, was then in the year 800, because this was when he was crowned the Holy Roman Emperor by Pope Leo III in Rome on Christmas Day. So
talking about symbolism, right?
Yeah, and also
propaganda to the core.
And talking about making a show, which was for clear the culmination of his political ambitions. And also here I found it interesting that there were some disagreements in the sources that I read. So some were saying, yeah, this was obviously clearly his goal. Others were he felt a little bit pressured by the Pope by himself, because as you can imagine, Charlemagne had control until basically up to the borders of Rome, with all of northern Italy that was under his control. So he was the powerful neighbor of the Pope. And some were then saying it was more that the Pope sort of forced this to him to make sure, my neighbor is going to defend me.
My friend, not my enemy.
Yeah. I think in the end it was for sure something as powerful as he has been, that he has planned and that he was clearly involved with, because the whole symbolism of just being declared the Holy Roman Emperor, the successor to the Roman Empire, the big shining beacon of civilization within Europe, that's nothing that just happens without you being involved in this, as powerful as a person as Charlemagne. But as we also will see, this will have repercussions through history and significance for centuries ahead. And because of all of these combinations, really Charlemagne is, even in today's time, still considered as the father of modern Europe, because first he played a big role in uniting most of Western Europe, even though it was through military force, but he was able to really combine an empire, how it has not been since the time of the Roman Empire and the downfall of the Roman Empire. And also because he laid the foundation for the development of later European nations with this, and fostering sciences and architecture with the way he has been, really, really trying to make sure that his place is becoming beacons for culture and architecture in the future. And this is why, until today, I think Charlemagne is one of the most well-known European rulers and still considered one of the most important, who was also an inspiration for other people. I think, for example, Napoleon was also then trying to follow sort of in the footsteps of Charlemagne.
Louis XIV, the Sun King.
I did not know that. Okay.
Yeah, he was also really obsessed. I think that I something I found really interesting, that he became this kind of hero symbol from across the Middle Ages, and his successors, not directly but indirectly, kind of always wanted to come back to this empire. Unfortunately, nobody really came as close as maybe Napoleon, but otherwise I think that he became a symbol, and that symbol was the replication of what happened across the Middle Ages.
Yeah, definitely. Was something very relevant about him. And yeah, like I mentioned before, he was really related to Aachen and obviously also the Aachen Cathedral. So the background is like when he became the ruler, or like when he expanded his empire, it was very quickly that he chose Aachen actually as his main residence. As far as I learned, actually, like you would have, as the ruler, you would have like multiple places / palaces where you would then stay, because in the end, wherever you end up in your own empire, well, you need a sort of place where you can stay. But apparently Aachen became his favorite location. And there are multiple theories why it is like so. First is that as people who visit Aachen today, it is located towards thermal springs, so like with hot water springs. And this was something that was what he really enjoyed about Aachen.
He likes this spa.
he liked to spa. I do not remember 100% if it was because he had some kind of disease or like some kind of sickness that caused him pain, and where then the thermal springs helped him. But definitely that was one of the reasons that was very often named why it was relevant for him. And the other was that it was just the geographic location actually of Aachen, which was very central within the whole region of his and also supposedly it was because it had around its forest, and he loved to hunt, so he would enjoy the hunting grounds around them. But anyway, Aachen became under Charlemagne a really, really important place. And so when he began the construction of this palace chapel, or also called the Carolingian Church of St. Mary, or we will know it later more as the Palatine Chapel, it's not 100% sure when it was constructed. They say it probably began between 790 and 800 CE. Most sources that I found say that the construction began in 793 actually, and it was then finished around 813. And when it comes to what he chose, you see a lot of what he already was going as a foundation. So this building, which was part of his ruling court and the housing complex that was assigned to him as a ruler in Aachen. It was built on the remains of a Roman thermal complex. So
Symbolism,
yeah, and a smaller chapel before that. And it was from the beginnings meant to surpass all the churches that were built north of the Alps at the time in its form and its size. And it had so much symbolism, as you said. So first, its design, which you can still look at marvel today, but more about it later. The design was inspired by typical Eastern Roman building traditions, particularly churches that you would find in the Byzantine areas. So the most common actually sort of inspiration that is named is the church of San Vitale in Ravenna. I know when we were in northern Italy, I told you that we were not able to visit Ravenna yet, but this is one of the places that we should definitely go, because really what you can see then there, and also have the designs there, are really, really great. So again, coming to the fact, we will go to
another place
with Charlemagne. So I'm sorry for dragging you all the places where Charlemagne is replaced with this. But yeah, when you see the San Vitale Church in Ravenna, you will understand how it was considered as an inspiration for Aachen Cathedral. And yes, so but you do not also have inspirations from the Byzantine traditions. You also have elements from really classical Roman traditions and Greek traditions, also then Frankish culture. So this is then this blend of different styles is then really called Carolingian style and Carolingian architecture.
Style.
Yeah, and it's a very unique thing. And what are some of the key elements are this, like, for example, the octagonal, difficult word, core, which was really still something very unique when we visited, and you do not see this that often, but the whole octagonal core with the number 8, and then you have in the columns and in the floors, upper heads, you have then, for example, some 16 pillars. So all of these different numbers symbolized something when it came to the Christian belief. And also what was interesting, it was especially making sure that you do not make it super wide, but actually very high, because the octagonal core also today, I mean, it's not very broad, but it's very, very high, and you can reach to different heights about this. And yeah, what is then also interesting to know is that only 1 year after the completion of this central part of the cathedral today, Charlemagne actually died. So he died in Aachen on the 28th of January in the year 814. And he was buried already that same evening in St. Mary's Church, which is today the central octagonal part. His body was actually later transferred to a large shrine, which was built in 215, made of oak and covered in various precious materials. And until today, his remains are displayed prominently in the middle of the Gothic choir, which is another big part of the church, which I will quickly come about. But I think for us, yeah, this was like one of the fascinating things to like really come to the place where you could see the remains of Charlemagne.
I think that entering and especially if you have never seen a building with Carolingian style, it's really breathtaking, I think so, because it combines, as you say, really interestingly, a lot of aesthetic statements from all around the world, especially from cultures that were really popular at the time, as the Byzantines, which is really interesting because they were not in good terms at this time. So there is also, I think interesting. If you have not seen the images of the church and you are thinking on visiting, do not see them. I think let yourself surprise of how interesting the artistic style of the church is.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation, because especially how well it blends, because you have then these clearly Byzantine elements, especially with the huge mosaic at the top and the dome of the center, which is a replica of what was supposed to be original, because the original was unfortunately destroyed. But then also all the marble columns that you see in the upper floors, and it's different styles that work so well together. And yeah, and also that's interesting in effect, because there was definitely tension between the Byzantine Empire at this time and Charlemagne, because as you know, the Byzantine Empire was the longer surviving part of the former United Roman Empire as the Eastern Roman Empire, and they saw themselves as the successors of the Western Roman Empire, because, well, they used to be part of the Roman Empire, strictly speaking. And then when you have now suddenly somebody going, hey, I'm now the new emperor of Western Europe and I'm the successor of the Romans, it was actually reported that that led to some tensions then with, at that time, Byzantine rulers.
I think that there is a huge debate about who really was, but in the end of the day, I think that it's interesting that because of this kind of debate, we have today amazing cultural and artistic developments that have lasted until today. I think that that's maybe another episode we will dive a little bit better or a little bit more into this Middle Age debate of who was the absolute successor of the Romans, which is in the end of the day, I mean, they fall for a reason. So
true. Yeah, so that a little bit about the starting of Aachen Cathedral, like quickly jumping through the later history. So some of the interesting facts about it, what I mentioned before about the importance of symbolism. So for a very, very long time, actually, Aachen Cathedral served actually also as the coronation church for the German rulers. So from the coronation of King Otto I in the year 936 until 1531, so more than 600 years, the Carolingian chapel or the Palatine chapel served as a coronation site for German kings and queens. So 30 kings and 12 queens were crowned there. And all of it took them place that they would receive the possession of the empire on the marble imperial throne, which you can still see today in the upper floor of Aachen Cathedral, which was supposed to be the throne of Charlemagne himself, but we cannot know for sure. So until today, it's very often told that it's Charlemagne's throne, but nobody can say for sure that it actually was the throne of Charlemagne.
And let me ruin it for you. They don't let you sit on it.
Yeah, good thing you didn't try to sit on it, but you can only go there under guidance. So
yeah, they don't. They are really. I mean, I understand it's a symbol, and nobody will. But it's marble. You could actually see it.
Yeah. So yeah, first thing, like you could see, even after the death of Charlemagne, Aachen Cathedral had very high historical significance, and it was as a coronation site. Apart from that, also what is very interesting about the cathedral today is that it really reflects the different centuries of changing architecture and significance. So the original Carolingian building, which is at the moment today like the domed center, the domed octagon, this is still mostly intact, and it has these two floors that are surrounding it, and it has been over the centuries it has been extended via other things. So probably the most famous, I would assume, today is the Gothic choir, which is like a huge hall that has been attached and towards the octagonal center. And I would assume the most impressive there are for sure the windows, right?
I mean, decorative style, definitely. I mean, the windows are massive, are highly decorated, and it is just, I mean, it is a lot of artistic differences in between. So you can, look to the windows and say a typical Gothic style, and then turn and see see Byzantine, and then turn and see a little bit more of a Greek style. So it's really a mix of everything. It's like everything in a pot, but it works.
Yeah, it works amazingly, and especially this Gothic choir with its huge glass and the stained glass windows, it's just absolutely breathtaking to look at. So from my research, it's over 1,000 square meters of glass that is built in there. And that's why it sometimes also gets the nickname the Glass House of Aachen. And if my research is correct, actually it was added from the year 1355. So has been more than 500 years of difference since the construction of the core part of it. But it is today also, I think, like probably the most second famous part of the whole building. And apart from that, also over the centuries, like smaller chapels in other styles were added or remodeled, and you can also visit them today. They are not as impressive, I will have to admit, than the choir and also the octagonal core, but still the whole experience is just something that is really amazing. And last but not least, unfortunately, as you can imagine from a building of this age, there has been some parts of it that have been destroyed, that had to be renovated. So first things, the cathedral suffered very severe damage during the year 1656. They ravaged a huge fire in Aachen, which destroyed big parts, and for example, roofs, tower, and other, especially wooden parts of the whole building that were used during the French occupation. Unfortunately, also it took some damage. Some topics of it were looted. So, for example, I found the information that 32 of the ancient columns, they were removed from the upper stores of the things.
What, Napoleon took something? Unbelievable.
Yeah, I know. It is really surprising. But this is also something what is the like, yeah, okay, you can be a big fan of Charlemagne, but then leave the stuff at the place that he made himself. But I'm diverting. And last and unfortunately not least, you can also imagine that the building was heavily damaged during World War II. So there was bombing and artillery fire that happened. And luckily, the basic structures and everything else survived. But over the times, extensive restorations took place. And until today, it's something that is very, very heavily under restoration efforts and made sure to stay intact. And probably the most famous sort of restorations were especially the mosaic that you would see in the dome of the thing that was finished in the 19th century again after it has been destroyed before. But until today, it really is a very, very great example still of.
I think that something that, I mean, it's still unbelievable. It's a building that has more than 1,200, 300 years. So it's still impressive that at least pretty much they build like the structural part of the building is still standing on.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think that that's how we have to appreciate it.
Yeah, that's true. Yes, so this is like mostly about the history, not as fast as I thought it would be, but spoiler, that's what I said, that I really like to talk about Aachen Cathedral. Coming also a little bit to some fun facts and stories. Do you remember the legend that we were told there about the importance that the devil had in building Aachen Cathedral?
I think that I remember the door.
Yes, that's a part of it.
But no, exactly. No. Also, it was in German. Let's not forget that.
Yeah, fair point.
I didn't understand like 100.
Fair point. But the door is definitely a part of it. So the legend says that when the cathedral construction was going on, they ran out of money. And somehow a gentleman appeared smelling of sulfur and I don't know what, and say like, yeah, he could help with that.
Of course.
And he would need in exchange only the soul of the first living being that would enter the church as soon as it has been completed. And I assume it was thought, that's a good idea. I mean, like nothing to suspect from this nice guy who is offering us money but smells of sulfur. But obviously that was the devil who was trying to get the souls of the first people that would enter Aachen Cathedral. But the smart people of Aachen, they were able to trick it because obviously they did not want to lose a human soul. So when it was completed, what they did is they caught a she-wolf, so a female wolf, and let the wolf run first over the threshold of the cathedral so that they were able to still fulfill the pact with the devil, but he did not claim a human soul, but only the soul of an animal.
Which is bad as well. Like, yes. That's not good.
Yeah, poor wolf, right? But the devil was so frustrated that he got, sort of tricked by them, that he slammed the main door, and he slammed it so hard that also his thumb got stuck inside it and actually ripped off. And until today, there is a hole in the main portal, which is supposed to symbolize the place where the devil's thumb was in. And when you touch inside the hole, you actually feel a little bit of cold iron about it. That's still a story that is told until today.
Most likely from the materials, but the story is still on.
Yeah, I love sort of these legends. I mean, like you come to so many places, especially churches in Europe, and you hear about all of these legends and story. And I find it just always so interesting also to see what could be the local unique twist about it.
I think that in every church there is this kind of stories, and it's always amazed me so much how much the devil wanted to build churches because it's always them helping actually to build the churches, which makes you think as well a lot about the budgeting of the creation of this amazing, stunning buildings.
Apart from that, I think some interesting stuff to know about Aachen Cathedral. One thing is the Aachen Pilgrimage. So actually, what I did not know before getting a bit more learn about Aachen is that it's actually a huge pilgrimage site until today. So since the year 1349, so also a really, really long time already, the Aachen Pilgrimage, or in German it's also called Heiligtumsfahrt, it takes place every 7 years. I think it lasts for about 10 days. And it has apparently visitors coming in from all over Europe and actually all over the world, because what is happening is that you will see on display 4 famous relics that were supposed to belong, first to St. Mary, Jesus Christ, and also John the Baptist. So the 4 relics are first a robe that was supposed to belong to St. Mary, the swaddling clothes of Jesus Christ, then the loincloth in which John the Baptist's head was wrapped after his head was cut off, and lastly also the loincloth from Jesus. Some sources said, I think, that it was the one that he wore when he actually was crucified. Some others just said it was a loincloth. And this is sort of apparently a tradition that goes a bit back towards Charlemagne, who had a collection of precious relics. As you can imagine, as a devout Christian, he was also interested in collecting relics associated to it. And until today, you can visit these relics. They are only actually exhibited during the days of the pilgrimage. And to my knowledge, the next one should be in 2030, actually, because the last one in 2023. And if it's every 7 years, the next one should be coming in 2030. So if you're listening to this episode and you already know you have you have nothing else to do in 2030, might be something to keep in the calendar. Normally it takes place in June, or at least in summer, as far as I know. And also something very worth to visit is the Treasury of the cathedral, which we have also visited during our time there. This is by itself, I think, not officially a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but it might be associated with it. But until today, it holds very important, extensive church treasury objects that also go back to the whole time, up until like with Charlemagne and starting his collection of very valuable things. It has about 130 different works of art, which are including like really, really beautiful liturgical objects, books, manuscripts, and like reliquaries that you have around, gifts that were given, as far as I know, to Charlemagne and also other rulers around there. Probably the most famous one are the Cross of Lothair, which is a huge, wonderfully ornated cross out of precious metals and with gemstones. And you also can find there a silver and golden bust of Charlemagne himself, which is supposed to have a part of his skull inside. Which,
I think that the treasury, it's as Ral said, maybe by itself not as impressive as you could imagine, but it's really, really nice to visit. So please, if you plan your visit in 2030, also
or
earlier, plan an afternoon in the treasury. Is really, really nice. And especially the complementary thing, seeing the church and then the treasury and seeing all these marvelous objects. It's really breathtaking.
Yeah, it was definitely worth it. So having talked now about what we think is worth to know about Aachen Cathedral, jumping then to the section where we say, why is it a World Heritage Site? Do you remember how many criteria it fulfills?
No, I don't. But I will say that at least 2.
More. So it actually is fulfilling 4 cultural criteria.
Oh, one of those.
Yeah, one of the many ones. So the first one it fulfills is criteria number 1. It's a masterpiece of human creative genius. And as I described before, so especially because of the blend of its different styles. So you have the Greek and Roman inspired columns. You have the beautiful bronze doors in the beginning. You have the mosaics and the clear inspiration of Byzantine styles and like this whole blend. And since its inception and its building has been considered like really as an exceptional artistic building, and also the huge dome and vaulted structure it is, like it was at the time of its building, it was very unique in its way. So this is why it's first fulfilling this whole criteria of a masterpiece of human creative genius with the blend of styles that you have there. Then, as I mentioned before, sign of cultural exchange. So this is criteria number 2. And there you can see first, like I mentioned before already, the definition of the Carolingian architectural style with the classical and the Byzantine traditions, and what you can also see today, still like with other styles that are belonging in there. And it has served as an inspiration for a lot of other actually religious buildings during the Carolingian Renaissance. So you could imagine, hey, that building was in the de facto capital of our emperor. And so like we want to do something similar. So
and replicate.
Yeah, so until the whole medieval period, it had really, really high importance for the European continent and inspiring the copies that it had there. And this is also part of then why it is meeting criteria number 4, which is as a heritage of special importance to human history, because it serves as a very good example of so-called Aulian chapels. So this are chapels that are related to a palace complex, how it was considered before, with its central planning that it had going around. And last but not least, it is linked to events of very high significance for world history. So this is criteria number 6. And like we mentioned before, it is related, or it's linked to the unification of the West that was considered under Charlemagne and the importance it held for him as a Palatine chapel, the political revival of Europe and the Carolingian Renaissance under his rule. It's until today his final resting place, and it has served as a coronation church for the different rulers of the German Empire, like I mentioned before. And all of this combination, from its architectural importance, is historical importance, also the importance it held regarding to faith now with the pilgrimage and with the treasury. This is why it is considered a World Heritage Site and so significant for human history.
In the end of the day, and I think that is really important to mention as well, is it is a church.
Yes.
But when you see that basically the creation of this church and the development of Aachen as a city pretty much began this concept of European values, because after the Roman Empire fall, there was complete chaos for a couple years, a couple centuries. So I think that this was the first time that this cultural development in Europe actually happened, and it really opened the door to 1,000 more years of history, European history and values, and what is considered European, let's say.
That's true. Yeah, and it is just very fascinating to experience it while visiting Aachen Cathedral. And I think this is a good sort of introduction to our last segment, which is coming about travel tips. I think some of the travel tips you already mentioned, like organically and naturally while talking. But go is first, definitely. But you mentioned it before. I think we would definitely recommend that you take a guided tour into Aachen Cathedral. To my knowledge, they should also be accessible in English. When we were there, I could not find any booking time for any English tours, but at least when I checked the website, they mentioned that there are also international tours.
So maybe just book in advance.
Yeah.
Just to make sure you can also have in different languages.
Yeah, but to make it clear, so you do not need to book a tour, for which you obviously will need to pay. But you do not need to book a tour if you just want to visit the main cathedral. So the admission is free. But if you want to visit certain parts of it, so first, if you want to go into the Gothic choir, where you will see, for example, the resting place of the remains of Charlemagne, and also the sort of reliquary where the relics are being held while they are not shown during the Aachen Pilgrimage. There you can only access into this part of the choir with a guided tour. Also, you can only go to the upper floors of the Palatine Chapel, where you can see actually the imperial throne, as a part of a guided tour.
The one where you cannot sit.
Yeah, the one where you cannot and definitely should not sit, Lina Fernanda.
Unless you want to meet a German jail.
I don't know if it's that bad, but I mean, like, definitely you should not do it. Like Lina mentioned, you can book online, but also you can get normally tickets without too much problem available at the information center and the box office, which is close by to
pretty much in front of it.
Yeah, we bought it actually there, if I remember correctly.
Yes, we didn't book in advance. Unfortunately, that's the reason why we took the tour in German, and I didn't understood everything, but it's a really nice tour, and I think that it was not that expensive. Do you remember how much was it?
I do not remember, I have to be honest. And I will also, like, probably by the time somebody's listening to this, it might have changed. It was not that expensive, But what then also would come to this if you also want to visit the Treasury. So the Treasury, obviously, you will have to pay extra entrance. This is not part of the cathedral by itself. It's very close related to it. But we thought it was definitely worth it. It was very interesting to see the exhibitions in there. You also have lockers there in the Treasury. That was for us very helpful, so we could store some of our luggage, or like more specifically backpacks there while we were exploring around there. That's also definitely a recommendation. Visit the Treasury if you have the time. I think normally 1 to 1.5 hours should be enough to experience the Treasury at a leisurely pace. So I would normally assume if you take for all of Aachen Cathedral and the Treasury around 3 hours, that is a very, very comfortable style of traveling.
Also, the church and the Treasury and the whole complex sits in like the square, the main square of the city. So also have some time to explore the main center. Is a really nice park around, and there is also a really nice like shopping center where you can really explore small stores and some more typical food-driven products that sell there. So maybe also plan, I would say 1 day to explore Aachen, its center, the church, and the Treasury will be a good time.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful town in my opinion. One of the major sites that also a lot of people like to visit is the Elisenbrunnen, which is the Elise Fountain, which is actually the water that's coming out of it. It's related to the hot springs around there, so you will smell it before you see it because it has a very, very distinguishable and notable sulfur smell to it.
Yeah, maybe the man that offered the money was just in the spa.
Maybe we do not know, but so this is also a very, very famous site that is super close by to you can nearly explore everything in Aachen on foot. And I think what is also, when you're somebody who's interested in visiting different World Heritage Sites, what's very convenient about Aachen is its location, because it's very easy to reach, first other areas in Western Germany, for example, but also it does not take long until you're in the Netherlands or until you're in Belgium. We actually used Aachen for us as a sort of center of traveling around and visiting different World Heritage Sites in Germany, but also in Belgium. So when you plan a trip around there, and you're interested in visiting multiple World Heritage Sites, look what's around, because you can really combine it very well, and the connections are via buses or trains very convenient.
I think that was the reason why we actually explored Aachen the last day. That's why we were with our backpacks, because we took like Aachen as a center and we travel each day to a different place, and the last day was completely booked for Aachen. So maybe if you are not interested in World Heritage Sites, you can also explore many cities that are really beautiful around. So maybe just check it out also to have some days apart for different sites around Aachen. It's a really center city in this region.
Yeah, it was really convenient. And I think also as a last information to keep in mind, we have mentioned multiple times, but it is a church. It is still an active church. So you have to sort of also respect the sacred nature. So dress decently. Go perhaps not there like with teeny tiny shorts or like just a bikini top. That is something that will be frowned upon. But I think more importantly, it is that there are still active masses held. So like the church might be closed due to any kind of church events being going on. So it's always a good recommendation to check the website, which you will find also linked to in our various supporting sources like the show notes, but also we will link it on our podcast, which you can find at our podcast, Instagram podcast. That's what I wanted to say. Instagram,
the marketing went really wrong.
The marketing went really wrong. Now you can find it at our Instagram channel for this podcast, which is at World Heritage Rookies. So check out the website before to get some further information and to see if there might be any conflicts for your own scheduling.
Also, we will be posting some images, of course, not from the inside, because as we mentioned, we want you to not have expectations and come into it and feel how it feels by yourself. So we will also post some tips and so please check it out at World Heritage Rookies.
Correct. And I think this is everything that we sort of wanted to share, especially to travel tips. Did we forget anything? Does something come to mind?
And Charlemagne's rocks.
Yeah, I hope that I made this clear enough during this episode, but no, then I think I'm done with talking about probably one of my favorite World Heritage sites.
I think that this is going to be a really sad episode afterwards because he's going to sit in a corner and say, it's over. I already talked everything I could talk about.
Well, luckily, I know I will still be able to talk about more stuff related to Charlemagne in the future. So
yes, there's a lot of sites. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, yes.
We will wait in you for the next one. Quite interesting, I think so. It's my turn, so that's why I say it.
Yes, I'm quite sure it will be interesting. So no clear information yet, but to let you know, we're not gonna stay in Europe. We're actually traveling back to the Americas, but not like in our first 2 episodes to Ecuador. Not again this time, but still Americas. But I'm very looking forward to our next episode. Until then, thank you so much for listening. Take care and see you hopefully for the next episode.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.